Once upon a time, in a small town nestled deep in the heart of the countryside, there lived a family of 4. Parents David and Emily, and their 2 children, 10-year-old Tommy and 7-year-old Lily. They lived in a quaint little cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by vast fields and dense forests that stretched for miles in every direction. One night, the family was fast asleep when suddenly, David and Emily were startled awake by the sound of footsteps coming from down the hall. They listened intently as the footsteps drew closer and closer until they stopped right outside their bedroom door. Then, to their horror, the door creaked open, and in stepped Tommy, their eldest child, his eyes wide open but with a blank expression on his face. "Tommy, what's wrong?" Emily whispered as she got out of bed and went to him. But he didn't respond. Instead, he simply stood there, staring at them with an eerie calmness. "Tommy, honey, are you sleepwalking?" David asked as he got out of bed and joined his wife. But Tommy didn't seem to hear him either. Instead, he slowly walked up to his mother and whispered, "I'm sorry. The devil told me to." Emily's heart skipped a beat as she stared at her son in disbelief. "What are you talking about, Tommy?" she asked, her voice shaking with fear. But before he could answer, Tommy suddenly collapsed onto the floor, his body convulsing violently as if he was having a seizure. David and Emily quickly rushed to his side, trying to hold him still as they called for an ambulance. The paramedics arrived within minutes and rushed Tommy to the hospital, where he was immediately admitted to the emergency room. Doctors ran tests and performed scans, but they couldn't find anything wrong with him. They attributed his episode to a simple case of sleepwalking, but David and Emily knew better. Over the next few weeks, strange things began to happen in the house. Doors would open and close on their own, objects would move without explanation, and the children's toys would often be found scattered across the floor in bizarre patterns. One night, while Emily was putting Lily to bed, she heard Tommy talking to someone in his room. She crept over to his door and listened in, her heart pounding in her chest. She heard Tommy speaking in a low, guttural voice, saying things that made her blood run cold. "Who are you talking to, Tommy?" she asked as she opened the door and turned on the light. But to her horror, there was no one there. Tommy was sitting up in bed, his eyes closed, as if he was in a trance. And then he opened his eyes, and they were pitch black, as if there was no light inside them at all. Emily screamed and ran out of the room, waking up David and Lily in the process. They all huddled together in the living room, terrified of what was happening to their son. The next day, they contacted a local priest, who agreed to come and bless the house. He arrived in the late afternoon, carrying a cross and a Bible, and began to pray and sprinkle holy water throughout the house. But as he approached Tommy's room, he suddenly stopped, his eyes widening in horror. "There's something evil in here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something that shouldn't be." The family never returned to that house again. They moved away, far from the town and the memories of that terrible night. But Tommy was never the same. He never spoke about what happened to him that night, but he was always distant and withdrawn, as if he was carrying a heavy burden that no one else could understand. He never sleepwalked again, but his nightmares continued, and his parents could hear him talking in his sleep, saying things that made their skin crawl. Years went by, and Tommy grew up to be a troubled young man. He had difficulty forming relationships, and he often got into trouble with the law. His parents tried everything they could to help him, but it seemed like he was always running away from something that he couldn't escape. Then, one day, Tommy disappeared without a trace. His parents searched for him for months, but they never found him. They received a phone call one night from a stranger who claimed to have seen Tommy in a rundown motel in the middle of nowhere. But by the time they arrived, he was already gone. David and Emily were devastated. They knew deep down that something terrible had happened to their son, and they would never be able to find peace until they knew the truth. Years went by, and the family moved on as best they could, but they never forgot about Tommy. They visited his grave every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, laying flowers and saying prayers for his soul. Then, one night, as they were getting ready for bed, they heard a knock at the door. They looked at each other, confused, as they weren't expecting anyone. David went to answer it, but when he opened the door, there was no one there. But then he looked down, and there, sitting on the doorstep, was a small wooden box. He picked it up and brought it inside, where he and Emily opened it with trembling hands. Inside the box, there was a note, written in Tommy's handwriting. It said, "I'm sorry. The devil told me to, but I fought him, and I won. I'm at peace now. Please don't look for me. I love you both." David and Emily cried tears of joy and relief, knowing that their son had finally found peace. They never knew what had happened to him, but they knew that he was at peace, and that was all that mattered. But every now and then, late at night, they would hear a faint whisper in the darkness, saying, "I'm sorry. The devil told me to." And they would hold each other close, knowing that some horrors were never truly laid to rest.